$5 bought this forgotten workshop, but that hollow board keeps calling me.
She was 20 and broke. No room, no coat fit for winter, no family willing to keep her, just a scorched cloth, and $5 she had hidden inside the hem of her skirt. And with that $5, she bought a forgotten starch collar pressing room outside Troy in Rensselaer County, New York, a place that had fallen off county maps in 1971. The north wall had bowed 6 inches outward. Cold rain had eaten through nearly half the roof. The county condemned it on October 14, 2022, with demolition planned for the following spring. But inside the steam press cabinet, behind a clamp board no one had opened in 51 years, something waited that would alter the shape of her life. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Leah Rourke had been pressing her whole life without knowing it. As a child, she learned mornings by heat. Her mother rose before daylight in a rented kitchen near South Troy, set a flat iron over blue gas, and pressed hotel shirts while Leah buttoned cuffs into pairs. Steam gathered on the window, and by 7, the room smelled of soap, scorched cotton, and weak coffee. They owned little, but every collar left the table exact. Her mother, May, had thin wrists and a habit of testing an iron near her cheek. She could hear dampness leave cloth. Before school, she showed Leah how to lay a scorched cloth over white cotton and how to lift, never drag when the starch was nearly dry. The deeper lessons came from May's father, Leah Rourke, who kept a narrow laundry room behind a barber shop on Congress Street. Every Saturday, Leah crossed the river with 2 boiled eggs in her pocket and found him mixing wheat starch in enamel. He let the paste cool until it filmed over, then thinned it by spoonfuls, crushing each lump against the side. Together, they dipped detachable collars, rolled them in linen, and waited 12 minutes before blocking them over curved zinc forms. Eamon's left thumb was flattened from an old press injury, yet he could fasten a collar around a board without leaving one buckle. At noon, he cut an apple into 8 equal pieces, placed one beside Leah's elbow, and had her press the collar again until its edge held without shining. Clean work gives a person one less reason to bow. Leah did not understand it then as dignity. She understood only that Eamon never hurried a collar belonging to a man with patched cuffs. Hy died in February when Leah was 14. The barbershop landlord emptied the back room before May could borrow a truck. The zinc forms went to scrap the press to auction the ledgers into a wet alley bin. May saved 1 scorch cloth and Eamon's brass starch spoon, but the spoon disappeared during their third move. The cloth remained. After May died, Leah went to live with Rhonda Keene, a second cousin who kept the house dim even at noon. Rhonda wore felt slippers and knew the sound of every drawer. She counted bread slices, marked milk levels with pencil, and opened Leah's mail over the sink. Nothing in the house was openly forbidden. Everything required permission, and permission changed according to Rhonda's mood. Leah worked evenings at a wash and fold shop and stored each week's pay in a blue laundry envelope beneath folded towels. On October 3, Rhonda placed that envelope on the kitchen table. It was empty. Beside it lay Leah's mother's metal button tin, packed with 2 blouses, stockings, and the scorch cloth. Rain clicked against the window while Rhonda stood with a hand on the chair. "You are old enough to disappear now, Leah." Exactly 8 words. Leah counted them because counting kept her hands still. She looked toward the hallway where May's framed photograph had always hung. The nail remained pale against the wallpaper, but the photograph was gone. Rhonda explained neither loss. She slid the tin forward with 2 fingers. Leah closed the lid, lifted it, and walked out without asking for either one. For 6 weeks, she moved south and north toward warmth. 3 nights she slept in the Albany bus terminal until a guard began recognizing her coat. In Cohoes, she spent $9 on a church cot and stew, then hid beneath the rear stairs of a closed pharmacy when the shelter filled. She walked to Watervliet, slept one night inside an unlocked delivery van, and woke with frost silvering the windshield from within. Her money fell from $32 to $19, then $11. She washed her face in library sinks, dried her stockings beneath hand blowers, and folded the scorch cloth beneath her cheek. In Troy, a diner manager paid her $4 to press 2 white aprons on an iron kept for pie crusts. She bought oatmeal thread and nothing else. By mid-November, she had $5 left. The Troy Public Library was warm enough to make her sleepy. Leah sat beside a radiator and read old classifieds because new listings required deposits. Near the bottom of a county surplus sheet, beneath notices for culvert pipe and broken office chairs, one line had been boxed in blue pencil: abandoned collar pressing room, tax default structure, as is $5 cash deed. In smaller type came the parcel number and a warning that demolition costs would transfer to the buyer. She copied the address onto the back of a bus receipt. The clerk at the reference desk watched her fold it twice and said the county office closed at 4. Leah touched the $5 bill through her skirt pocket. Shelter for one night would consume most of it. The deed might purchase only rotten timber and debt. Still, a pressing room was the first place she had seen described in words her hands understood. At 3:12, she closed the library book, lifted the button tin, and began walking toward the county clerk's office. The $5 bill was warm when she laid it on the brass counter. The clerk turned the $5 bill toward the window, flattened its curled edge with her thumbnail, and told Leah the deed would not be ready until morning. That left no money for a room. Leah carried the button tin east through Troy until street lamps thinned, then followed Route 2 toward Brunswick with sleet gathering in the seams of her shoes. A produce driver took her 6 miles in the back of his truck beside empty apple crates that smelled of damp wood. After dark, she found a hay barn with one broken hinge and slept beneath a horse blanket stiff with dust. The temperature fell to 27 degrees. She woke twice to stamp feeling back into her feet and once to the sound of mice working patiently inside the wall. At first light, she walked the remaining 9 miles toward Eagle Mills, where the road bent past Delurie's Farm Market, Martin's Feed and Seed, the Red Front Tavern, McCardle's Hardware, and a narrow diner called Doris's Cup. Smoke lifted from their chimneys in straight gray columns. Men unloaded flour, a woman swept salt from a doorway, and no one knew that the girl carrying the dented button tin had purchased a condemned building somewhere beyond the last row of houses. The county annex occupied a former bank beside a parking lot edged with frozen weeds. Leah entered at 8:53 and found the same clerk behind a high oak counter. She had iron gray hair pinned with 2 black combs, and a small burn scar across the knuckle of her right hand. The brass plate beside her blotter read MR's Helen Vale Deeds and Tax Sales. Mrs. Vale placed 3 sheets before Leah and rested one finger on the first paragraph. You understand the roof may collapse. Yes, ma'am. You understand there is no legal water service. Yes, ma'am. You understand the county will not remove debris. Yes, ma'am. You understand demolition becomes your responsibility. Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Vale studied her for a moment, not unkindly. Then sign where I have marked. Leah signed in a careful hand. The clerk sanded the ink, pressed a brass county stamp into a red pad, and brought it down with a firm mechanical click. The sound was smaller than Leah expected. $5 changing ownership ought to have sounded like a door slamming or a church bell, but it was only brass meeting paper. Mrs. Vale slid the deed across the counter. Take Route 2 east for 3 miles. Turn left at Pinewoods Avenue, then right onto Old Red Mill Road. You will cross a narrow iron bridge. The parcel begins beyond the second stone wall. Leah folded the deed into the button tin. Mrs. Vale's gaze settled on the signature, Rourke. Leah stopped fastening the latch. Your people were in laundry work. My grandfather was Eamon Rourke. The name spoken in that room changed the air around them. Mrs. Vale removed her spectacles and cleaned one lens with the corner of a ledger cloth. She said Eamon had brought collars to the annex every Thursday during the years when county clerks still wore detachable ones. He charged those who could pay and quietly marked a dash beside the names of those who could not. During the flood of 1977, he pressed shirts without taking payment for men applying to road crews. He once repaired my father's only white collar the night before a funeral, she said. Stayed past midnight to do it. Leah held the tin against her ribs. Mrs. Vale opened the bottom drawer of her desk and placed the $5 bill inside rather than into the cash box. The pressing room belonged to a woman named Adelaide Mercer. Your grandfather apprenticed there when he was young. I had forgotten that until I saw your name. Did he ever speak of it? Not to me, but he knew that building. Mrs. Vale took a pencil and darkened the turn at Old Red Mill Road on Leah's bus receipt. Then she added the north door sticks. Lift it before you push. Outside, the morning had brightened without warming. Leah walked past the diner, then beyond the last gas pump and the final mailbox. Old Red Mill Road narrowed between fields where the cut corn stood gray and brittle. At the iron bridge, she met a man splitting kindling beside a green house. He wore one red wool mitten and one leather glove. You looking for the Mercer place? Leah nodded. He pointed with the axe handle. Past my lower fence. Dog barks, but he's tied. The dog was a broad yellow hound named Otis, according to the metal bowl near his chain. He rose, gave 3 grave barks, and watched her pass without pulling. Beyond him, black walnut trees leaned over the road, their bare crowns clicking together in the wind. The pressing room stood behind the second stone wall. It was longer than it appeared in the tax photograph, roughly 28 feet by 16, built of red brick over a fieldstone base. A 1-story timber addition clung to the rear like a box pushed against a stove. The slate roof sagged above the north corner where 3 rafters had slipped and rain had darkened the wall beneath them. A short brick chimney leaned west by several inches. Over the front door, a warped wooden sign still carried the pale remains of gold lettering, Mercer collar pressing. Leah stood far enough back to see the whole building. The north wall bowed exactly as the county notice had warned. Ivy had entered the mortar. One window was boarded, another held only triangular pieces of glass, and the front step had split through the middle. Yet the chimney remained upright, the lintels had not failed, and the rear addition sat square on its stone footing. She set down the tin. The door resisted. Remembering Mrs. Vale's warning, Leah lifted by the iron latch and pushed with her shoulder. The lower edge scraped over warped pine, releasing a breath of cold starch mouse nesting and old soot. Inside light entered through broken glass and settled on a pressing table stained the color of tea. Her shoes disturbed grit that crackled beneath the soles. A row of glass starch bottles stood on a shelf, their contents hardened into white stone. When she touched one, the bottle felt colder than the air. Somewhere in the rear wall, water tapped slowly into metal. The front room held two curved collar forms, a foot-operated press, and a cast-iron stove whose door hung open. Leah ran her fingers over the press bed. Beneath the dirt, the padding still gave slightly. She smelled rust-wet wood and the faint mineral odor of dried starch. It was not pleasant, but it was familiar enough to loosen something in her breathing. A narrow doorway led into the back room. There she found a wash sink with a cracked porcelain rim, a copper warming tank, and the tall steam press cabinet mentioned in the sale inventory. Its doors were swollen shut. A broad clamp board had been fitted across them and locked with an iron bar blackened by age. Leah tested the bar once. It did not move. Near the rear wall, a broken gutter fed rainwater through a seam in the roof. Each drop struck an enamel basin with a hollow note. She shifted the basin beneath the leak-swept one dry corner with a bundle of straw and laid her coat over the least warped boards. That evening, she ate half a heel of bread given to her by the produce driver and drank water from a hand pump beside the road. Darkness entered first through the broken windows, then filled the ceiling. The building cooled quickly. Leah wrapped herself in the horse blanket she had carried from the barn, placed the button tin beneath her head, and listened to the press cabinet settle behind the wall. The floor smelled of pine where her sleeve had rubbed away the dust. Wind moved beneath the door. Far off, Otis barked once and was quiet. The house had been waiting. On the first morning, Leah followed the sound of running water beyond the rear addition and found a stone-lined well beneath a roof of rotted cedar. The pump handle moved, but the leather cup had dried hard inside the cylinder. She carried water instead from the greenhouse near the bridge, where the man with mismatched gloves filled her enamel basin and pointed toward an outhouse leaning behind the walnut trees. "Seat is sound," he said. "Door is not." By the third day, Leah knew which floorboards merely complained and which ones shifted under weight. Two short creaks led safely from the front door to the stove. A deeper groan beside the pressing table marked a joist, softened by rain. At night, she placed starch bottles along the dangerous edge so she would not step there in darkness. She also learned that hunger made every repair appear urgent. McCardle's Hardware smelled of machine oil seed potatoes in the coal stove burning near the register. Its owner, Amos McCardle, had one eyebrow permanently raised by a white scar that ran into his hairline. He looked at Leah's deed, then at the list she had written on the back of the county warning. "You own the old Mercer room. For $5. That explains why you cannot buy much." She asked for a chimney brush, stove, cement, lamp oil, a bucket, and the cheapest pair of work gloves. Amos wrote each item in a narrow account book without reaching for money. "I have no credit," Leah said. "You have a building. It is condemned. So was my first truck." He turned the ledger toward her. "Sign here. Pay when the roof stops leaking or when you leave town, whichever comes first." The brush cost $2.40, the stove cement 38 cents, lamp oil 19 cents a pint, cotton work gloves 45 cents, and a galvanized bucket $1.15. Amos added a used putty knife without pricing it and placed a green-covered manual on top. The title read "Repairs for the Farm and Small Shop." "Government printed too many in 1946, he said. "No one has managed to wear this one out." Leah carried the supplies back against a wind that pressed her skirt to her knees. The chimney came first because heat made every other task possible. She removed the stovepipe, covered the opening with a damp flour sack, and climbed the roof from the low rear addition. The slate shifted beneath her shoes. She tied the brush to a sash cord, lowered it through the flue, and worked it down in short rotations, rather than forcing it past the bend. At the first obstruction, black creosote broke loose with the sound of dry grain pouring into a bin. For 4 hours she brushed, withdrew the line, cleared the bristles, and lowered it again. The soot filled half the bucket. A hard glazed section near the smoke chamber resisted the brush, so she scraped it from below with the putty knife taped to a broom handle. By late afternoon, her cuffs were black, her shoulders trembled, and the chimney drew a clean strip of cold air against her face. She patched 2 cracks in the stove collar with cement, waited until morning, and built the first fire with newspaper walnut twigs and 3 pieces of split maple left beside Otis's fence. Smoke hesitated beneath the stove lid, then lifted into the pipe without spilling into the room. Leah watched it for 10 minutes before adding another stick. She boiled water in the enamel basin and cooked oatmeal with a pinch of salt from a paper fold Amos had placed in the manual. The meal tasted faintly of smoke and iron. She ate beside the stove with her back against the pressing table while warmth spread slowly through the bricks. Only then did she begin the workroom inventory. She found 7 objects worth keeping. A heavy collar iron rested beneath the sink, its handle wrapped in cracked leather. 3 zinc blocking forms hung on nails, each curved for a different collar height. A stoneware starch crock stood beneath the warming tank with a wooden paddle dried inside it. There was a linen rolling cloth, yellowed but uncut, and a brass spray tube with 6 holes drilled in an exact line. A ledger lay swollen shut inside a drawer. Against the rear wall stood a maple finishing board worn smooth where thousands of collars had been turned beneath careful hands. The 7th object was the steam press cabinet. Its cast iron frame rose nearly to Leah's shoulder. Two cabinet doors were held closed by the broad wooden clampboard and the iron bar she had tested on her first evening. Rust covered the hinges, but the board itself was strangely clean beneath the dust, as though it had been fitted later than the surrounding machinery. Leah tapped the cabinet with the handle of the putty knife. The left door answered with a flat iron note. The right produced the same. When she struck the center of the clampboard, the sound was lower and briefly hollow. She pressed her palm against it. The board was heavier at one end. Using a length of stovepipe as a lever, she raised the iron bar. A quarter-inch slid lamp oil into the brackets and waited. She did not strike the lock. Eamon had taught her that wood remembered force long after the person using it had forgotten. An hour later, the bar lifted. The cabinet doors opened inward only 2 inches before meeting resistance. Leah lay on the floor and shone the oil lamp through the gap. A cedar disc nearly as wide as a dinner plate had been fastened behind the clampboard with 4 brass screws. Its edges were dark from age, but its center showed a pale crescent where something had rubbed against it. She removed the board from the cabinet and carried it to the pressing table. On the ordinary side were shallow marks from collar clamps. On the reverse, the cedar disc sat flush inside a circular recess. The screws turned reluctantly. Leah placed each one in the lid of a starch bottle so none could roll between the floorboards. When the last screw came free, the disc remained fixed. She warmed the wood near the stove, then slid the putty knife beneath its edge. A smell of cedar rose into the room, dry and clean after decades behind iron. The disc lifted. Inside the board was a narrow compartment wrapped in waxed linen. Leah did not pull everything out at once. She carried the bundle to the front room, shut the door against the wind, and cleared the pressing table. The first package contained Eamon's brass starch spoon, dark at the bowl but unmistakable from the small notch in its handle. Beside it lay 2 bone collar gauges, a steel seam folder, and a pair of spring clamps with maple jaws. The second package held unused linen bands, a paper packet of wheat starch sealed with red wax, and 4 curved collar blanks cut from heavy cotton. Each had been marked in pencil with a temperature, a starch ratio, and a pressing time. The third was a tin document box. Its latch opened without a key. Inside lay 40 folded savings certificates bundled in groups of 5 with cotton tape. Leah read the first twice before understanding the printed value. Most were issued by banks in Troy and Albany with maturity stamps and handwritten renewal dates. Together they totaled $39,800. Beneath them was a small canvas purse and a military medal wrapped in a child's handkerchief. Leah emptied the purse carefully. It held Morgan silver dollars worn, Liberty Head nickels, wheat pennies, and 3 barber dimes. She counted each group twice, first by value and then by number. The coins came to $3.17. With the certificates, the cash totaled $39,803.17. The medal was a Purple Heart dated 1944. On the reverse, beneath the profile of Washington, someone had engraved the name Thomas Mercer. At the bottom of the box rested the laundry ledger she had expected to find swollen in the drawer. This one was dry. Its pages listed collars, cuffs, and shirts prepared between 1932 and 1941. Some entries carried prices. Others showed only a dash and a note in Adelaide Mercer's hand interview at Foundry, first day at hotel railroad examination, needs clean cuffs by 7. Folded between the final pages was a sealed letter. The envelope bore no name, only 4 words written in brown ink, for the one who continues. Leah sat until the stove burned low. She placed the certificates back beneath their cotton tapes, returned the coins to the purse, and wrapped the medal again. She did not open the letter. A person could receive only so much from the dead in one evening and remain careful with it. Outside, the wind had stopped. She walked behind this pressing room to where meltwater moved beneath a skin of ice along the drainage ditch. The moon made the surface look like dull tin. Leah stood there without her coat buttoned, listening to waterwork through leaves and stones, finding the path it had kept beneath the frozen ground. The house had been waiting. Morning entered through the broken east window and laid a pale rectangle across the pressing table. Leah relit the stove, warmed her hands over it, and turned the envelope beneath the light. The brown ink had faded unevenly, but the downward hook of the R and the narrow cross on every T belonged to the same hand that had marked Eamon's old collar blanks. She had seen it on labels tucked beneath his zinc forms. She opened the seal with the brass starch spoon. My dear one, whoever you are. If you have found this letter, then you have removed the cedar disc without splitting the clamp board. That tells me more about you than a name could. An impatient person would have broken the wood. A careless one would never have heard the hollow place. My name is Adelaide Mercer Rourke. In March of 1971, Dr. Samuel Berman at St. Mary's Hospital in Troy told me that the pain beneath my ribs was pancreatic cancer and that I should put my affairs in order. He spoke gently. I was 68 years old, and gentleness did not alter the work before me. This trade began with Nora Mercer, born in 1842 near Waterford, who washed mill collars beside the old canal and opened this room in 1878. Her daughter Eliza Mercer, born in 1866, added the steam cabinet in 1891 and married Thomas Rourke of Lansingburg. Their daughter Maeve Rourke, born in 1884, kept the books through the shirtwaist years and taught me Adelaide, born here in 1903. 4 women, 4 sets of hands, and 1 room kept honest by work. My husband Walter Mercer was killed near Saint-Mihiel in France in September 1918. Our son Thomas carried his name into the next war and came home from Europe in 1945 with a Purple Heart he would not display. He died 12 years later from an illness the doctor said had begun in his lungs overseas. I placed his medal here because he believed clean clothes mattered most when a man had little else. The pressing room closed on June 18, 1971. After that date, no starch boiled in the crock, no collars dried on the forms, and this cabinet remained shut. More than 30 years may pass before anyone reads these pages, perhaps much more. If the trade is unfamiliar to you, begin carefully. Mix 1 part wheat starch with 4 parts cold water before adding it to 6 parts boiling water. Hold the finished paste near 180 degrees, but never let it boil after thickening. Roll a dipped collar in linen for 12 minutes so the dampness reaches the center evenly. Press cotton near 350 degrees through a scorch cloth, lifting the iron every 4 seconds. Block the collar while warm and leave it clamped for 20 minutes before testing the edge. Do not mistake inheritance for ownership. These tools are not yours because you found them, and they were never mine because I purchased them. They belong to the work while the work is being done well. The certificates were saved from paying customers 1 week at a time. Use them to keep the roof above the room and the floor beneath your feet. The ledger will show why the rest was kept. A clean shirt never made a dishonest man honest, but it sometimes helped a frightened man enter a room where work was waiting. Behind the back door beneath the second walnut tree there is a slate marker for those whose names were never written in the ledger. Clear the leaves from it. Should you continue, continue without hurry. Should you leave, close the cabinet gently. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You are welcome here. Adelaide Mercer Rourke, March 2010, Summersviwan. Leah read the letter twice. The second reading was slower. At Walter's name, she rested 1 finger against the page. At the starch instructions, her lips moved as they once had beside Amon's enamel pot. When she finished, she folded the sheets along their original creases, not making a new one, and returned them to the envelope. She carried the lamp through the back room and lifted the swollen rear door until it cleared the sill. The ground outside had softened along the southern wall. 2 walnut trees stood beyond the drainage ditch, their roots lifting the soil in dark ridges. Beneath the second tree, Leah pushed aside wet leaves with a broken roof slate. She found the marker lying flat, no larger than a serving board, its edges furred with moss. There were no names carved into it. Only a detachable collar cut in shallow outline, and beneath it 4 words, for those beginning again. Leah washed the stone with water from the enamel basin. Mud ran through the engraved collar and darkened the letters. She remained kneeling until cold reached through her skirt, then set 3 field stones along the upper edge so runoff would not cover it again. Inside, she chose one of the old collar irons from the workroom. Its leather handle was too brittle to trust, so she wrapped it in linen and set the iron on the stoveplate. She mixed a spoonful of the sealed wheat starch with water, watching the cloudy liquid become translucent over heat. 1 unused collar blank waited on the table. She dampened it, rolled it in the yellowed linen cloth, and counted 12 minutes by the stove clock she had found stopped in a drawer. She moved its hands herself 1 minute at a time. The first press was imperfect. A faint shine appeared near the inner curve where she held the iron too long. Leah did not hide it. She cooled the collar, marked the place in pencil, and began again with the second blank. This time she lifted every 4 seconds. The finished collar stood cleanly on the maple board, its edge firm without becoming brittle. Leah placed it beside Adelaide's letter and thought of the people who had carried her through 6 weeks without learning her story, the produce driver who made room beside the apple crates, the church woman in cohos who added stew after Leah's bowl was empty, the diner manager who paid her to press aprons, and Amos McCardle who opened an account against a condemned building. None of them had changed her whole life alone. They had made the next hour possible. Before we move forward, think of one small kindness someone once gave you when they had no reason to help. Perhaps it was a meal, a ride, a warm room, or simply a person who believed your word. Tell us about it in the comments, because ordinary kindness often survives longer than the giver ever knows. That night, Leah placed the certificates inside the button tin and slid it beneath the pressing table. The medal, the starch spoon, the 2 finished collars, and Adelaide's letter rested beside her blanket. She slept with one hand near them, not gripping anything. The stove held its fire until dawn. The first snow came on December 6 inches, laid evenly across the pressing room, the stone wall, and the collapsed gutter. Leah woke to a silence so complete that she heard flakes sliding from the walnut branches. Above her, water from melting snow had already found the damaged roof seam and begun tapping into the enamel basin. She read the roofing chapter in Amos's green manual 3 times. The first reading showed her what she lacked. The second gave the names of the pieces. By the third, she could see the order of the work before touching a tool. The roof measured 29 feet along the eaves and 9 feet from ridge to drip edge on each side. Allowing for overlap and waste, she calculated 14 bundles of cedar shingles, 3 rolls of 15-pound felt, and 12 pounds of hot-dipped nails. The certificates could have purchased them without consequence, but she took only $1 silver to the bank and exchanged it carefully. Amos delivered the supplies in his truck. From beneath the seat, he brought out a roofing hatchet with a square pole, a shingle gauge, and a handle darkened by use. "My brother's," he said. "He has no roof left to swing it on." That afternoon, the man with the mismatched gloves arrived carrying a 20-foot ladder. His name was Silas Bell, and he had roofed barns for 43 years before his knees forced him down. "I cannot pay you," Leah said. "Good, then we will not argue over wages." They worked for 11 days. Silas showed her how to sister a sound rafter against one soffit near the north corner, fastening the new board beyond the damaged span. They rolled felt from the lower edge upward, each course overlapping the last by 2 inches. A chalk line snapped blue across the shingles and kept the rows honest when the old roof tried to pull the eye crooked. Silas drove every nail in 3 strokes, 1 to set it, 1 to carry it, 1 to seat it flush. Leah's 4th stroke buried hers too deeply. "That nail's proud. It looks low. Pull it." She pulled it. By mid-December, the new cedar lay pale against the brick. The final ridge shingles were bedded in roof cement beneath a sky the color of pewter. When Leah climbed down, Silas remained at the foot of the ladder and looked along the eaves. "Rain can come now," he said. That night it did. Leah lay awake listening, but the enamel basin remained empty. January exposed what fire had hidden. The outer chimney bricks were spalling their faces, breaking away in thin red shells whenever frost entered them. Mortar beneath the cap had softened to powder. Leah loosened each failed joint with a narrow chisel, brushed it clean, and packed the cavity before the next freeze could enter. The manual called for hydraulic lime where moisture moved through old masonry. Amos advised 3 parts sharp sand to 1 part lime for the exterior joints, then equal parts fire clay and refractory cement inside the smoke chamber. Leah mixed only what she could place in 20 minutes. Anything older began to stiffen in the bucket and tempted a careless hand to add water. For 3 weeks, temperatures stayed in the 20s. She worked barehanded because gloves dulled the pressure needed to finish a narrow joint. Every 15 minutes, her fingers went numb. She warmed them against a stone jug filled from the kettle, then returned before the mortar skinned over. Silas brought 2 sound bricks from a farmhouse chimney he had dismantled years before. Amos lent her a mason's line. Leah replaced 6 bricks, reset the capstone, and rebuilt the cracked shoulder where the stovepipe entered the flue. On January 28th, she waited until afternoon when the mortar had held through 4 dry days. She twisted newspaper beneath 3 maple sticks and opened the damper fully. The flame rose. Smoke entered the throat past the repaired chamber and drew cleanly above the roof. Leah walked outside and stood beneath the walnut trees until she saw the thin gray column leave the chimney without wavering back toward the bricks. She returned inside and added 1 careful log. Beneath the dirt, the front room floor was white pine secured with hand-cut rose-head nails. The boards had darkened under starch soot and decades of shoes until their grain could scarcely be seen. Leah countersank every raised nail with a square punch before renting Amos's random orbit sander for $14 a day. The first pass at 80 grit removed the gray surface and revealed old burns around the stove. At 120, the tool stopped fighting the grain. The final pass at 220 softened the sanding marks without polishing the board so tightly that oil could not enter. She vacuumed twice, then wiped the floor with clean linen. The cloth came away carrying dust the color of flour. The oil went on in 3 thin coats. Leah warmed each can near the stove, spread it along the grain, and removed every wet patch after 20 minutes. She waited 48 hours before crossing the room again. The pine shifted from dull brown to dark honey, then deepened near the press into something close to mahogany. Old paths appeared where workers had turned between the cabinet and the stove. Leah did not sand them away. Wear was damage only when it prevented the next step. One morning she woke unable to lift the sander. Nothing had broken. The roof held the stove drew and food waited in a paper sack beside the door. Still her arms remained beneath the blanket. She walked to the marsh beyond the lower field and sat on a stone. A great blue heron stood in the reeds, 1 leg folded, its long body motionless above the moving water. Leah watched it for most of the morning. When it finally opened its wings, the shadow crossed the creek before the bird did. She returned before dark and performed no work that day. The floor waited without accusation. There were 8 windows in the pressing room. 3 had no glass. 4 were cracked from corner to corner. The 8th contained 1 original pane green at the edges and faintly rippled set into the front wall when part of the structure had been built in 1788. Leah preserved it. She removed each sash, marked its position in pencil, and scraped the brittle putty without driving the knife toward the glass. New panes rested on thin beds of Day P33 glazing putty. Leah pressed glazing points into the muntins with the side of the putty knife, then rolled fresh putty into cords and tooled each bevel so rain would leave the glass rather than settle against it. The sash cords had rotted inside the weight pockets. She replaced them with quarter-inch cotton line, feeding each length over the pulley and tying a figure-8 knot through the counterweight eye. The first knot slipped because she dressed it carelessly. The iron weight fell inside the wall with a sound like a distant bell. She opened the pocket and tied it again. For the original panes, she used no power tool. She cleaned the old glass with warm water and whiting, leaving the small bubbles and wavering lines intact. When she set the sash back into its frame, the walnut trees outside bent gently through the imperfect surface. The last window belonged to the rear workroom. Leah raised the sash, adjusted the cord until both weights carried evenly, and drove the final glazing point by hand. A chickadee landed on the walnut branch beyond the glass. It turned its black-capped head toward her, tapped once at the bark, and remained while she smoothed the last line of putty beneath the sill. The walls proved less patient than the windows. Behind the steam cabinet, horsehair plaster had separated from hand-split oak lath and bowed outward like damp paper. Leah tried 3 patches near the chimney. The first cracked overnight, the second sagged because she worked it too wet, the third adhered to the brick but pulled loose from the old plaster at its edge. Amos found a burlap bag of horsehair beneath his store stairs, left from his father's repair work. Leah washed it in hot water, dried it beside the stove, and cut it into short fibers. She mixed it into lime plaster until each handful held together without becoming ropey. The scratch coat went on first, pressed through the gaps in the lath and scored with crossing lines before it hardened. Over that, she laid a 3/8-inch brown coat, leveling it with a cedar straight edge and allowing 72 hours to cure. The finish coat was 1/8 inch thin enough to follow the old wall rather than erase it. She could still identify the failed places when evening light crossed them. Their surfaces were not perfect, but they no longer moved beneath her palm. These patches will hold another 100 years. She did not say it aloud. Doris came first. She owned the narrow diner with the fogged front windows and wore her silver hair in a net that caught the kitchen light. Every third morning, she drove out before dawn and left a folded paper bag on Leah's doorstep. There might be 2 biscuits, a heel of ham, or a jar of soup wrapped in newspaper. Doris never knocked. Leah carried 3 empty jars back to the diner and placed coins beside the register. Doris pushed both toward her with a flour-dusted wrist. "In candles when the shop reopens." She turned to the grill before Leah could answer. Caleb arrived on a blue Schwinn bicycle during the first week of March. He was 16, long-limbed, and wore a wool cap with one ear flap missing. A splitting maul lay across his handlebars, tied there with clothesline. Without introduction, he began breaking the walnut rounds Silas had left beside the woodshed. His first swing struck too near the edge, but the second opened the wood cleanly. He worked until the pile reached Leah's knee. She offered him 50 cents. He shook his head and rubbed one thumb across the worn bicycle grip. "My mother said, about your grandfather." That was all. He returned the next Saturday and sharpened the maul on Amos's shop wheel before using it. Reverend Boyd passed each morning on his walk between the parsonage and the church. He had a white mustache trimmed level with his upper lip and carried a black umbrella in clear weather. He never entered unless invited. At the stone wall, he removed his hat, inclined his head toward the pressing room, and offered the same 4-word prayer. "Keep these hands steady." Some mornings Leah heard him. Some mornings the wind took the words. He continued saying them. Leah postponed the cellar until February 11. The door beneath the rear stairs had swollen against its frame, and when it finally opened, cold mineral air rose into the room. 7 granite steps descended to a fieldstone floor 12 feet by 15. The walls sweated near the frost line. Rusted shelves leaned beneath empty preserving jars, and a narrow drain disappeared under the north foundation. At the center lay a dressed granite slab, rectangular and too deliberate to be ordinary paving. A small carved craft mark crossed one corner, a detachable collar enclosed by 2 clamp lines. Leah knelt and cleared dust from its edges. She did not lift it. The foundation needed no new disturbance, and the house had taught her that discovering a hidden place did not grant permission to open everyone. On the 3rd step, her broom struck wood. A small oak box had been wedged beneath the granite lip, its lid held by a greened brass hook. Inside rested a brass key whose bow had been shaped into the same curved collar symbol carved on the central slab. Beneath it lay a tintype wrapped in flannel. The photograph showed a woman standing outside the pressing room in the summer of 1903. She was 25, perhaps, dressed in a dark work skirt and a white blouse with sleeves rolled past her wrists. In one hand she held a collar iron. Her face carried Leah's straight mouth, wide brow, and slightly uneven eyebrows, so precisely that Leah looked away before studying it again. On the back, written in iron gall ink, were 9 words. Adelaide Mercer, daughter of Nora, age 25, summer of 1903. Leah carried the photograph and key upstairs. The tintype went beside the letter. The brass key remained on the mantel where firelight passed through its curved bow. She did not know what had opened. Snow retreated first from the stone wall, then from the southern slope. The creek beyond the marsh grew loud with meltwater and carried small limbs beneath the iron bridge. Walnut catkins appeared in April green and soft against branches that had seemed dead for months. Leah cleaned the starch crock and repaired the foot pedal on the press, but she did not begin the full trade that spring. The old instructions deserve practice without customers waiting at the door. She chose one Warren Morgan dollar from the canvas purse and exchanged it for wheat starch, unbleached cotton lamp oil, and a length of linen. On scraps no larger than her hand, she tested mixtures, drying times, iron temperatures, and pressure. She marked every failure in a new ledger. One sample blistered, another remained limp, a third held a clean curve until morning. She placed it beside Adelaide's photograph. The house was patient, so was she. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Leah completed the first collar she was willing to call finished. She began before sunrise mixing starch in the stoneware crock until it fell from the paddle in a clear ribbon. The cotton rested rolled in linen for 12 minutes. She blocked it over the smallest zinc form, pressed through the scorch cloth at 350 degrees, and lifted the iron every 4 seconds. After 20 minutes beneath the maple-jawed clamps, she released it. The collar stood without brittleness. Its inner curve remained smooth. No shine crossed the surface, and no starch gathered at the edge. Leah turned it beneath the east window where winter light showed every weakness. There was none she could not accept. The pressing room around her had become quiet in a different way. The white pine floor held a deep amber glow. 8 repaired windows moved on balanced sash cords. Fresh lime plaster followed the uneven brick without concealing its age. The steam cabinet stood open, cleaned and oiled, while the cedar disc rested inside the clamp board exactly where she had found it. Above the stove, the brass key still hung from a square nail. That afternoon, while gathering fallen walnuts near the marker, Leah noticed a narrow green line beneath the bark of the second tree. It appeared too straight to be a natural split. She brushed away moss and found an oval brass plate embedded on the sheltered side of the trunk, nearly hidden by 40 years of growth. At its center was a keyhole. The brass key entered but would not turn until Leah pressed the plate inward. A small compartment released from the trunk with a soft wooden knock. It had not been cut into living heartwood. Someone had fitted a box inside an old lightning hollow, then sealed the opening beneath the plate. Inside lay a folded 48-star American flag wrapped in oilcloth and a note dated October 7, 1918, during the closing weeks of the First World War. The handwriting belonged to Adelaide. She wrote that the flag had covered Walter's empty coffin during the memorial held in Troy because his body would remain in France. The collar room had closed for one day. The next morning she reopened it, not because grief had passed, but because 6 returning soldiers needed shirts pressed before reporting for railroad work. She had placed the flag in the walnut tree after Thomas left for Europe in 1943. The note ended with one instruction: if Thomas's medal ever returned to the room, the flag and medal should be brought together once beneath an open sky and then separated again so neither became an object of display. Leah sat at the foot of the tree with the oilcloth across her knees. Above her, the branches moved against a white December sky. She could see the repaired chimney and one corner of the cedar roof. The following May, on Memorial Day, she carried Thomas Mercer's Purple Heart and Walter's folded flag to Oakwood Cemetery in Troy. Mrs. Vale had helped locate the family stone on a hill above the Hudson. Leah placed the medal there at 9 in the morning, kept the flag folded, and remained until the cemetery bell marked noon. There was no ceremony. Silas stood 20 feet away with his hat in both hands. Amos left a small bunch of lilacs. Reverend Boyd spoke no prayer aloud. Before leaving, Leah wrapped the medal again in the child's handkerchief and returned it to the tin box. The flag went back into oilcloth, but not into the walnut tree. She placed it inside the steam cabinet beside Adelaide's letter, where dampness and insects could no longer reach it. The savings certificates had matured long before Leah found them. A bank in Troy confirmed their value and helped transfer the funds into a protected account. She used 3 silver dollars and 2 barber dimes from the canvas purse. $1 purchased the first practice cloth and starch. A second paid for cedar to repair the workroom shelves. A third bought a black wool coat sturdy enough for winter. The 2 dimes were set beneath the restored threshold, one at each corner where they could not be spent twice. The certificates themselves paid for taxes, structural materials, and nothing grander. Leah sealed the remaining principal in a trust tied to the property. The paper stated that it could be used only to preserve the room, teach the trade, or shelter a person learning to begin again. Across the first page, she wrote 4 words: for the next one. The shop reopened without announcement. Doris pinned an index card to the cafe corkboard between a notice for a lost beagle and an advertisement for piano lessons. It read, collars, cuffs, and white shirts pressed by hand. Repairs accepted. Payment when possible. The first customer was a hotel porter who owned 1 formal shirt. The second was a woman preparing clothes for her husband's burial. By January, Leah kept a mailing list of 43 names in the dry ledger drawer. She never hurried the morning close. Caleb returned in early spring, taller than before and carrying a long object beneath a canvas dropcloth. He had been apprenticing with a sign painter in Cohoes and had spent 6 evenings carving letters from white pine. The original sign still read Mercer Collar Pressing, though weather had erased half the gold leaf. Caleb had made a smaller board designed to hang beneath it. The new words were cut deeply, their edges imperfect but deliberate. And daughters. Leah ran her fingers through the carved ampersand. There was only one daughter in the photograph, she said. Caleb set the sign against the wall and removed his cap. Doesn't say whose daughters. They mounted it that afternoon using 2 forged hooks Amos had found in the hardware cellar. From the road, the old name and the new line appeared to belong to different years, which they did. The wind moved the lower board slightly beneath the first. Leah began her own letter on the 3rd anniversary of finding the cedar disc. She used brown ink and wrote at the pressing table after closing. The first words came without revision. My dear one, whoever you are. She described the roof measurements, the chimney mix, the 8 windows, and the figure-8 knots hidden inside their weight pockets. She recorded Doris's soup jars, Silas's 3-stroke nail method, Amos's account book, Caleb's sign, and the prayer Reverend Boyd had given to the road each morning. She did not write that she had saved the building alone. She explained where the trust papers rested and why the central granite slab in the cellar remained untouched. She drew the shape of the brass plate in the walnut tree, then crossed it out. Some discoveries belonged to the patience required to notice them. At the bottom of the 2nd page, she added a practical instruction. If the starch begins to skin while still in the crock, cover it with damp linen rather than thinning it. Water added too late weakens the finished edge. Then she wrote what Adelaide had understood before her. The house had been waiting. Leah folded the unfinished letter and placed it inside a new envelope. She did not seal it. There would be years of work to add names not yet entered in the ledger and mistakes worth preserving for the next pair of hands. Outside, evening gathered among the walnut branches. The lower sign moved once in the wind. Warm light crossed the restored glass and reached the collar marker beneath the 2nd tree. The starch collar pressing room waits. It has always waited. In the county annex, Mrs. Helen Vale retired at 72. On her final afternoon, she emptied the upper drawers, labeled the deed books, and removed a small envelope from the bottom of her desk. Inside lay the $5 bill Leah had placed on the brass counter. Mrs. Vale wrote the parcel number across the envelope and returned it to the drawer before handing the key to the new clerk. There it remained, its curled edge still flattened by her thumbnail.